We're always pleased to have Congressman Devin Nunes with us. Welcome back. Thanks for being here again, Congressman. This week has not been a good one for China. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, says the U.S. is looking possibly to ban Chinese social media apps like TikTok. And let's not forget, this week we find out that China may have a little bit of bubonic plague showing up. But let me start on the tech stuff, especially with a California congressman. Obviously, Silicon Valley, Northern California, very important. Tech is very important to your neck of the woods. Tell us what's going on with China and their TikTok specifically.
Well, there's an interesting irony here, Eric, in talking about TikTok. The concern is that it's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And they have the ability, their intelligence service have the ability to go in there and get that data, and they're also controlling the content. Now, how does that relate to Facebook, Google, and Twitter? They're doing exactly the same thing. It's just that they're doing it on behalf of the Democratic Party. The people that run those corporations are left-wing ideologues, or the corporate boardrooms are afraid of the left-wing ideologues. So the way that it works is that the propaganda, the media, and I'm not trying to offend you or your show because I know you try to do a good job in getting the facts out there, but what you do is you take the propaganda, they run it, and eventually it reaches the corporate boardrooms because it runs through all the media. The corporate boardrooms and the extremists that work at Google, that work at Facebook, that work at Twitter, they end up controlling all of that content and intravenously feeding it to the American people. That's exactly the same concern that the State Department has with TikTok, that exactly the same thing's happening. So you have Chinese Communist Party propaganda making its way into the American people. I find the irony quite, I think this is a good lesson, though, for the American people. They need to understand that TikTok's bad, but so are these other companies.
You know, Congressman, what about those who say free speech is protected under the First Amendment? Anyone can say what they want. Tell us, I think there's a little bit of a difference with distinction here, whereas free speech is important. You should be able to say what you want to say. But then again, you're suggesting that some of these companies, the social media companies, are regulating how much of different types of speech we're allowed to consume as a consumer of these social media platforms.
Yeah, I think that's a red herring argument. And in fact, it's these social media companies that are including TikTok from China, including Facebook, Google, and Twitter. They're actually taking away our First Amendment right. So when the internet and the World Wide Web was first created, it was supposed to be an intersection where everybody met. And the only thing these tech companies were supposed to do is they were supposed to ensure the safety of these intersections so that everyone had access to these intersections. What's happening now is quite the opposite. Because they're tech oligarchs is what I like to call them, they're monopolies, they control the entrance to the public square. And you have to remember, the US taxpayers are the ones that actually helped to develop the World Wide Web. And then we gave these companies powers to ensure that they were going to make sure that everybody could go on there and put their content. So it's actually the opposite, Eric. They've taken away our First Amendment rights. They're not protecting it in any way, shape, or form.
So there's an interesting little subplot developing with social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and others. Some are trying to hold these companies accountable, Zuckerberg and Facebook, for some of the comments that are being made. Now, this, for me, ventures into an area of very dangerous area where government is going to now talk about or regulate what comments are allowed to be posted on some of these platforms. I mean, we do give Facebook, Twitter, even Parler the rights to decide what they're allowed to post on there. So their private companies are allowed to do that. But when is government extending its hand too far into private business?
Well, look, whenever you become a monopoly, that's the concern here, is these companies are monopolies. I'm glad that you brought up Parler. So I'm using Parler pretty much exclusively now. I still have to go onto Instagram and Facebook and Twitter every once in a while to put something out just so I can reach the people that are not on Parler. But what Parler's doing, I think, is what should be done. And what they're using is they're using the long established rule of law based on the FCC and other guidelines. So in other words, I think a good rule of thumb is that if you can say whatever I can say on your show here, okay, because you have kind of basic regulations, right? Like I can't come onto your show, or let's use the old classic one, run into a movie theater and say, fire, 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 everybody get out, and then people get trampled, people get injured, people get killed. That's not free speech. So I think the way that you're regulated at Sinclair, and your show's regulated, that's essentially kind of a good rule of thumb of how the intersections should be regulated. So, for example, you should not be able to go on there and put pornography, especially child pornography, things that are against the law. Those are the things that should not be allowed on there. You can't just go on and just defame people. You know, defamation, slander, libel, those sorts of things, should not be tolerated. Now where they should be, and this is the problem with Twitter, Facebook, and Google, is, they're essentially suppressing when someone goes on there and says, oh, well, look, I don't agree that you should be able to tear down statues. I don't agree. I think BLM is an extremist group, and I think they're tearing down statues of Frederick Douglass, who was really a hero of the African American community. I think that's wrong. What Google, Facebook, and Twitter are doing is they're saying, oh, wait, you can't attack Black Lives Matter. You're a racist. You have to pull that down. So that's where that's the problem. That's where they're intersecting. And that's really the difference.
You know where they're intersecting,
going to take off.
Congressman, they're intersecting at editorializing, and typically they've kind of shielded themselves from scrutiny and regulation by saying, we're not going to editorialize. We're not going to be a news service by editorializing. Therefore, leave us alone. And we've generally left them alone. And now, by omission and by selection, that's exactly what they're doing. They're editorializing. We'll see. I'm on Parler as well. I know John Mates, the CEO of Parler, was there from day one. He's been on this show more than a year ago. We'll see. It's a tall order. We'll see if he can continue to be as, I guess, fair-handed as he's been up until this point. Congressman Nunes, appreciate your time as always.